Hi, I'm Miriam Vogel with EqualAI, and we are so pleased to have you join us for this edition of In AI We Trust. Welcome back to In AI We Trust. I'm Miriam Vogel, and I'm thrilled to have another episode with you. Today, we are delighted to be joined by my good friend and former National AI Advisory Committee colleague, Paula Goldman. She currently serves as Chief Ethical and Humane Use Officer and EVP of Product at Salesforce. For years, Paula has been a leader in the technology space, championing the application of technology for social impact and responsible use. At Salesforce, she helped shape how one of the world's leading technology companies develops and deploys AI ethically, thoughtfully, safely. Before that, she advised organizations ranging from startups to financial institutions, and her research at Harvard explored how bold, unconventional ideas became mainstream, a very fitting lens for her job and to help us through the revolution that we're living through with AI today. Throughout her career, from Omidyar Network to Salesforce, Paula has helped organizations answer one of the defining questions of the day and perhaps our time. How do we harness AI's extraordinary potential while ensuring it works for people? This September, Paula will publish Manage the Machine, How to Harness Human AI Collaboration at Work, a timely and practical guide for leaders, employees, and organizations navigating the new realities of working alongside AI. Paula, it is so wonderful to have you on the program today. Thank you for being with us.
It is always a pleasure to get to connect with you, Miriam.
Thank you. Well, to start, I want to congratulate you on your upcoming book. It's so exciting. I know from personal experience how much work, how it involves, and I know you had no shortage of things keeping you busy as it was. So I can only imagine what a Herculean effort this has been for you. But I also know from having been through this experience myself that there's no shortage about books on AI at the moment. And it really must have taken something deep in you to want to move forward on creating a book on AI right now. What convinced you that this was a book that leaders needed to read right now?
It's an excellent question, and one that my husband asks me all the time. Like, why did you have to write this book? No, he's been incredibly supportive. But I will say I think it's the right question because AI is moving so fast, and it is a very crowded, noisy conversation. But I had this drive inside me that I had to cultivate this idea and put it out in the world. And the reason why was because I just found the conversation about AI so frustrating. In particular, I think if you really read the headlines, it's like essentially giving people the impression that AI is coming for all of us, that it is going to be so powerful as to basically make humans obsolete. And I started having these really friends and colleagues who are super smart and well accomplished reach out with a large amount of anxiety, in particular about this topic about what does AI mean for work. And, I think there are perspectives out there that are kind of extreme on both sides about that question. And what I really wanted to do was break it down and show, not at an abstract level or sort of like at a cliche level, but really, why does it matter to roll out AI in such a way as you center and strengthen human capabilities like insight and judgment and creativity? And why does that get better results? And how do you do it responsibly? And that's the book.
Well, I can't wait to ask you more about it and share with our listeners what this is that you have put in writing for all of them to learn from. But I also want to first talk about another milestone. You have a fascinating job title, a fascinating job that you created, the Chief Ethical and Humane Use Officer. Can you tell us about why you wanted to create that role and what has surprised you in serving in this role that others who may want to follow in your lead should know?
Well, the cool thing about it is actually the idea of the role was not mine. It was the employees at Salesforce who came up with this role. And I think, really credit to the leadership of the company and employees who had a really farsighted approach on this and said, technology is developing really fast. And there's a lot of answers for which there's no real playbook in terms of how to use it in a way that that it can be trusted. And trust has always been the number one value at Salesforce. It's what's enabled customers to do things like back in the day, like put their data in the cloud, which at the time was a radical thing. And so they created this role. And then I came into it now 7 years ago, which is so hard to believe, but so, far predating this wave of AI, which is really great because we were able to kind of lay down a whole bunch of process and culture and technical foundations to be able to have the right infrastructure ready for the moment when it hit. I will say the role started a lot kind of focusing on policy and guardrails. Like, what are the red lines on the floor for customer use of technology? And that remains constant. We still have responsibility for that. But it did not take long to really discover that there was a very important part about just like really being deep in the technology itself and the design of the technology and looking to anticipate risks. And sort of mitigate and prevent them. And so that's why we've been very, very deep with the product and engineering teams on that and with our AI research team, and also working on questions of whether the technology really truly works for everyone. So I own product accessibility. I would love to talk about that. It is like the most exciting time with AI. It's so what AI is doing for accessibility is amazing. So there's that as well. But it's like it's been so rich and super fun.
Well, one thing in particular I'd love to make sure people learn from you before we move on to other topics is how you have turned this role into a partnership with the product teams, with the sales teams. Too often, through our badge program, we're helping the governance lead in the different companies learn how to storytell, learn how to be a partner so that they can be involved in conversations organically and early. This is particularly often a problem, not just for governance teams, but lawyers who are often seen as the office of no. And I know that you have done so much to make sure that is not what your office is seen as. How can we understand the way that you have created this role, this team, this partnership so that it has been so successful and appreciated across the company?
Yeah, I think it's funny because there's two sort of almost conflicting answers to that question. The first is really like, and it's funny when I talk to peers who have a similar role, there is a huge amount of success that depends on like translation ability. Mm-hmm. And that people use that word, how do you translate? So how do you take these questions of ethics or like it might be privacy or it could be toxicity or name bias, name whatever the issue might be. And the question is like, how do you take that and translate that into like, you're going to go talk to a product executive or an engineering executive. Mm-hmm. What's the business risk? And like, how should we think about that? And how do we demonstrate that we really understand what you're trying to accomplish? And more often than not, when we sit ourselves with really deep relationships with these teams, we find that the improvements like are great for the product itself, and they go beyond a risk analysis to an innovation conversation. Mm-hmm. And that is really, really exciting and rewarding. So that's one part of the question. The second part, which is also, and I would say like we're really deep in this right now, is the use of technology ourselves, right? So that especially now as AI first engineering is widespread and as product and engineering teams are going at a velocity that is just truly unbelievable, we are also accountable for having technology that scales with that. So for example, we have an accessibility agent that is able to scan code for accessibility issues and auto remediate them. And it's like growing and scaling, and it is so cool. And it's like so exciting. And it also allows our team to focus on the questions that really require judgment and not the bugs that we see all the time. And like, it's that kind of thing that increasingly, I think, governance lives in code, right? And so we're really deep in that right now.
Governance lives in code. I love that. And I appreciate using AI for good, using AI to help solve the problems. We're going to have to increasingly go there. And the other point you raised, that governance, if done well, is the unlock for innovation. Yeah. And the more we can demonstrate the model that you've set, I think the better off we all are, so that we can achieve that, which we need to if we're going to build trust in AI systems. And we have a lot of work ahead of us, obviously, to do that. And so we're going to need to do a lot of learning from you as to how you've done that. But the other thing I have to ask you about is your prescience in the PhD you wrote examining how unconventional ideas become mainstream. You've spent your career, obviously, studying societal adoption of transformative technology innovations. What do you think is different about AI than what you might have studied before? Or is this just another iteration of what you've studied previously?
Yeah, it's so interesting because my PhD, I really appreciate the question. My PhD I was largely looking at social movements and sort of how these kind of ideas that were seen as crazy, really, became mainstream, and sort of tracing how they moved from like different actors, how the messages moved and all that kind of stuff. And then after that in my career, I was also working on mainstreaming impact investing. And there too was this question of like, there were some orthodoxies that had to be challenged to be able to make the business case for that. What's different about AI, I think there's a few things. I'm curious how you would answer the question, Miriam. But I would say, one, the scale and the pace, like you're used to, like we're used to dealing with an issue that's like an issue, right? Or a topic, but AI cuts across every industry and it is changing so quickly. And I actually think that's part of, back to your original question, why did I write this book? Part of what I think feels so disempowering about the current narrative we have about AI is people feel like, I couldn't possibly keep pace. And it's true. It's really hard to keep pace. But I think there are certain principles that hold kind of even as the technology changes, and there's certain approaches that hold and ways of thinking about it that it's really important people feel like they're in the driver's seat, so to speak, because that's what's really crucial to getting the right outcomes.
Couldn't agree more. The fact of how fast it moves and innovates and iterates. I think it was one thing to get people to think about testing AI, but then understanding the iteration that new patterns will learn. And there's no such thing as buying a perfect AI tool because it will learn new patterns with the data and use cases that you're adding to it. And so I think that really changes the conversation. It's not like you're buying a car and you learn how to use it. It's the car is turning into a spaceship as you use it. And we have to wrap our heads around that. The fact, like you mentioned, that it doesn't sit in one use. It is across enterprise. And in fact, the only way to get the real value out of it is to go outside of our silos. So I love to think of it as the disruption for good, but we have to get out of our comfort zones of operating in a silo, assigning AI to the IT department or tech. It just doesn't work that way. We have to come together. We have to have a multi-stakeholder approach or else it just won't work. And that is uncomfortable, but invaluable.
And that challenge is such a challenge for how we think about governance, right? But like if every department is like basically running its own AI, this notion of like even how it was hard to do it before in a centralized way, but it's probably unwise now to like really think about it that way. Anyway, there's so much to talk about there.
Yes. Yeah. And then finally, reframing the word governance. It's a bad word. It's compliance. It's government. It's bureaucracy. It's smart. It's the seatbelt and it's the odometer. It's making sure there are standards to build trust and ensure things deserve our trust. And again, that's why I'm so excited to talk with you about how you do this every day and how you're instructing others in your book. And I think you're taking on one of the most important conversations that we need to have today. And that is the people part of the AI innovation. It's intended to serve people, and that's often getting lost in translation all over in how it's being heard and how it's being communicated. And I'm so excited for your book to change that narrative where you help articulate how AI can support humans if done the right way. So please tell us, what does effective human AI collaboration look like? And if this is an organization that it is doing well, what is different about how they're operating and beyond just what technology they're buying? What is the culture change? What are the outputs that would be different in your utopian version of how this will play out? Not utopia, your actual version.
maybe let's take customer service as a case study, because it's a place where there's a ton of adoption. We've all, in some way, shape, or form, interacted with AI or an AI agent in customer service setting. And I can tell you, like, when I want to renew my prescription or get it filled, or I want to return or something like that, like, I don't want to wait on hold for half an hour, and I just want it done. And AI has become incredibly effective at those kinds of routine transactions, and it saves a lot of time and money and frustration on behalf of customers. But AI also makes mistakes, and some of them have been quite public. Like, we saw the New York City chatbot advising landlords how to abuse renters. We saw a car dealership having someone basically get it to offer cars for $1 through their AI agent. Lots of places like that, and best practices to avoid that. And those, I think, are pretty well established right now. But I think the interesting part is really thinking about the human dimension of customer service. And there's two pieces to that. So one of them is like, where do your customers actually want to use AI and not? And like, how do you distinguish, right? Like, what's the best stance vis-a-vis your customers and then also your employees? So let me kind of give you some thoughts on both. On the customer side, there's a lot of research that says people love AI for routine things in a service setting. Also, when they're angry, though, they want to talk to a person. They don't want to talk to AI. They want a person to handle those requests. When they're embarrassed, let's say it's like a sensitive medical situation, they want AI. When they have an emergency, obviously you or a really complicated, high stakes situation, you want a human involved, and you want that for more than one reason. Like, so let's say there's you see health service has a chatbot, and if you say, I'm having trouble breathing, it's going to escalate you to a person immediately. Or 1-800-ACCOUNTANT, which is a company that does financial services. Every year at tax time, they're inundated with people asking for tax account status. Great thing to automate. But if they have a complex financial question, they want to, you want them to talk to a person for a whole bunch of reasons, not just legal liability questions and how this is all regulated, but also the high value customer who has a complex question. You want to give them really good customer service. That's the other side of it too, is that in these moments where someone has a really complex question or someone has an emotional situation, they have an emergency, they're calling a bank because a loved one has died and they need to change the account. These are moments where your relationship with your customer makes a massive difference, right? And this is the time when all that research that says, it's so much harder to gain a new customer than to just retain an existing one. This is where you provide that value add, is through that human touch. So that's part of it, is there are real human preferences and real situations that delineate that you don't use AI for everything. Use judgment on where you use AI in customer service. But here's the second part of it. The second part of it is, it turns out it actually, when you get the right balance, it's actually better for employees in service settings as well, right? So there's a story that I tell in the book that's about a visit that I had to the Department of Motor Vehicles in California. And I was not looking forward to it at all. And I go in and they have all these systems automated. So I'm expecting to talk to a bunch of upset employees who don't want to talk to me. And instead, they're super delighted to see me, super delighted with the Salesforce automation that they've used, the AI that they've used to help get real ID queues down to just a few minutes. And everyone I talk to is happy. How does this even happen? Well, here too, there's a bunch of research that's when customers are when they have experienced efficiency in these queues, they also treat the people in these roles better. The people in these roles are happier. They're less overloaded. And it's a virtuous cycle. Everyone's happier. And I think that's, again, we have a choice about how we implement this technology. We can just throw it on everything, or we can think about how we do it in a human-centric way. And when we do that, we have much, much better outcomes.
Well, I want to go a little further on this because I think this is the key. And the more people understand what you are teaching here, the better off we all are. So you've made a few points about when we should think about the human's activity and the human in the loop, the human in charge, and when we offload to AI. Is there a framework or way of thinking about how you make these decisions? Because you're doing this at enterprise level in your day job. So how are you advising leaders to make these enterprise-wide decisions about when to invoke human judgment and when you can delegate or relegate or invoke or get the assistance of AI?
Yeah, well, I will say, and we should come back to the term human in the loop because I have lots to say on that. But I think it's different for different functions, right? So I think for customer service, I just went through a whole bunch of rules of thumbs. But for marketing, the equation is much more about authenticity at scale. And the balance of sort of like real human connections, and in-person events and stuff like that with these digital touch points that are increasingly AI generated, and it's different for HR and so on. But there's a whole bunch of principles, right? A set of questions to think through in every use case. And one of them is what we just talked about, like how do you set the right human AI handoff? Another of them is about preserving relationship building, preserving the capacity to connect either with customers or with team members working together, like employees connecting with each other, which is also, I don't know if you've seen these recent studies that say there's like really increased sense of disconnection when people use AI at work and don't connect with each other as humans at the same time, right? There's another one that's about how do you make sure that people that are meant to oversee AI don't just like click yes, 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 right? And there's like, it's a principle of intentional friction, of places where you add just a little bit of a hurdle when you're approving something, if it's really consequential, to make sure that the person has actually taken the time to think about it. And there's one about preserving creativity as well. And we can go into that too. Like, how do you... we've all had this moment, right, where I have to write this email, this blog post. Do I just like go immediately to write it? Do I let AI write it, the first draft, or do I? And so there's, I think, a bunch of emerging best practice about how you preserve the sort of critical thinking and creativity before you let AI in and throughout the process. And again, that's different from function to function, but there's a whole bunch of like principles and questions to ask.
So the approach would be look at principles to guide your organization's plan and then specify in the different division depending on the priorities, the values, the needs of that division, which then we can look in your book and understand.
That's exactly.
So that's really helpful. And for you're mentioning the consumer case, making sure that consumers get to weigh in on when they would on what they want, on when AI should play a role. Do you have a sense of where it's going too far? Like what would be the wrong use? What would be the way to get this wrong with the consumer point of view?
Well, that's interesting. So that's a really good question. I'm going to go in two different directions with it. So one is just to think about what happens when the script is flipped.
Yeah.
So, my inbox is full of AI generated emails. I don't know about you, but I rarely open them.
Sure.
And now I have like an AI mode in my inbox where it is helping me decide what to respond to. Mm-hmm. And increasingly, we're all going to have our own consumer agents we're already seeing this in the world of marketing where AI is sort of disintermediating search. It's making, people that find an AI answer to a question are less likely to then go to the website of the company or organization. Mm-hmm. So in essence, like, companies are using AI to personalize experiences for customers. Customers increasingly are using AI to filter out AI outreach. And so the competitive line is just getting higher and higher. It means that companies are going to have to think about all of these things we just talked about. Like, okay, if I'm in marketing, how do I get all of the right in-person or authentic community, online experiences? How do I make sure I've got the right touch points with people? How do I make sure that the content I'm putting out actually is really resonant and very authentic, and so on? So I think that's part of the answer to your question, is that like, this is not a static thing, like that the what it takes to competitively differentiate is changing because of AI, and these human skills become more and more, not less important. So that's the first part. Okay, so here's the second part of where I was going to go with your question, which is that I think sometimes when you really pay attention to how customers are using our product, you get signal on this. So when we at Salesforce, when we first rolled out AI customer service on help.salesforce.com, we were patting ourselves on the back because we're like 99%, first resolution rate, so great. And then we looked really deeply at the data, and there were places where people just wanted to talk to people. And there, when you get a situation like that, it's like, well, what matters most? The customer experience matters most. Right. And so we calibrated down a few percentage points and sort of increased the escalation rate to humans. And that made for much better customer satisfaction. So sometimes the market will tell you, and I think people's attitudes are changing, but it's really important that we're paying attention to that. Because again, it's much easier to keep a customer than to gain a new one.
So we need to be listening, looking for signals. We need to listen to our customers. We need to watch the market. We need to be responsive. And I think I would argue that's a lot of reason why we are where we are today with this distrust of AI, because we've forgotten to listen. We're talking at people. We're not listening to their concerns, which are valid, and we're not giving them use cases, which are meaningful. So I'm so grateful that your book is going in a better direction in both of those counts, giving use cases that are meaningful, that can actually inspire people to use it and understand why and how. And I just have to ask, given I know how agentic forward Salesforce is, and given your work with governance, how does this all impact your advice? And I ask this because we had, as you may know, an agentic AI summit in May with EqualAI.
Yeah.
And it was fascinating to do a workshop and then a simulation where we had agentic AI uses that quickly became incidents, that quickly became crises, where the simulation participants were all assigned a senior role at a hypothetical company. And our white paper is recently released that shows at a top line what everyone needs to be looking for. And I can give away the biggest conclusion here, and that is, if you have governance in place, you're in a much better position to thrive with agentic AI. And obviously the point there that's problematic is how few companies, less than 1%, have strong governance in place. So I'm really curious, as you're giving this advice, how you're thinking about how agentic AI changes the governance conversation. And if there are best practices you want to make sure all of our listeners either implement or look for in the companies they're working with.
Yeah. Well, I think it changes the conversation radically on both fronts. So like on the one hand, having AI agents increases the risk significantly, right? Because you're having AI that not only predicts or recommends, but acts and goes through very complex series of logic and reasoning to get to sub-steps and steps, right? Can do a lot of damage if it's not well controlled. On the other hand, it makes the imperative for governance higher. It also makes it much more complex to govern because it's so widespread. It can be applied to almost anything. And every organization in a company is going to have its own agents, right? And so how do you think about that challenge internally? And I think it requires like a couple of adjustments. One is this question of like, how do you find the right balance of centralization versus decentralization? So every organization, like if marketing and HR and legal all have their own agents, arguably they are closest to the use cases for those agents. And they're going to have like a nuanced set of best practices for how to use that. And you really want to empower that. And then there's a set of risks that are so crucial to the company. Let's say it's like agents that touch high amounts of money or agents that have significant legal risk or something like that, where you're going to want a centralized cross-functional, deep deep look at that, and really tracking what's going on. So I think that's one part of the question. And I think the other part of or I should say the answer, and the other part of the answer is really, I think, about, again, using technology to help with the governance, right? Because again, there's going to be so much data that a human could not possibly digest all of that. And there's going to be so much dynamic change in use cases. But how to use AI to track as a registry, how to use AI to like proactively detect anomalies and so on. And again, I think that's going to be, that is a big part of where governance is going, to our earlier conversation, which is like, how do you really make sure that governance is code?
Yeah. Yeah. And that is certainly a theme that we talk about in the white paper and talked about in depth at the summit. How do you use agents? One of the best uses is, to detect cyber threats, to respond to adversaries using agentic AI. But it also raised some serious questions. And that's why I'm wondering if this is where you were going with the human in the loop question.
Yes.
A lot of interesting questions. So very curious to hear what your concern is with that concept.
Well, so, and I might be creating a straw man here, so bear with me. But, the notion of human in the loop has this long history. It emerged from sort of Cold War era warfare, where there were these new questions about like, okay, technology could do all this stuff with sophisticated weaponry and detection and so on, but who should decide what to do, for example, if there was a signal of an incoming missile, something like that. And that evolved to this notion of like people, the human in the loop. There's someone that's like really gonna make that decision. Over time, I think the phrase has sort of lost its meaning. So, for a long time, I think, especially like as ChatGPT first came out, it was like, well, the AI is going to draft the email and then you're going to check it. Like kind of had this connotation, you're checking everything. My team, a couple of years ago released this set of content about a concept we called human at the helm. You could call it human in the lead. But this notion that like you cannot, that is not the right way to partner with AI, is to think you're going to be checking every single, just not possible with agents anymore. But how do you make sure that for the things that matter, not only that that's going to go before a human that's going to take accountability for that decision, but that actually that human is cognitively prepared to do so. Like, because for example, when I used AI to vibe code my book website, and it asked me for permission over and over and over again to go look at different external websites. And by the fifth time it asked me, I was not paying attention anymore, right? And so, there's two related questions in there, is like, one, what really needs to go to a human? Yes. And then second, once it goes to a human, how do you make sure that they're actually really thinking about it and they're not on autopilot? So it's like this notion of intentional. Do you have to like type in a little bit of a rationale, or like, does it get seen by someone else? Or there's all these methods for putting in a little bit of intentional friction. And that's like, to the book conversation, that's another part of the book. Like, it's like, how do you make sure that you've got the right level of oversight?
Yeah, that was definitely a theme that we discussed at length, the decision fatigue, and how you make sure you get the attention by asking for it at the right times on the right questions. Other concern that came up is one of the other best use cases for agentic AI that people aligned on after cybersecurity was data consolidation, information consolidation. So we get these huge reports, we get too much data and information every day to ingest, have it consolidate. Well, and then, as you said, we're not going to be acting upon each of these consolidations. We're going to have it start to make recommendations and act with one another agents. So then, as you get down the line, once it has made several decisions based on several reports that it has ingested and decided on, how can the human at the end make that final call when they've been so far removed from those line of decisions and the content that led to those recommendations? So Yeah, several reasons why human in the loop is getting much more complicated and needs to be redefined for sure in the agentic conversation.
Yeah, agree. Yeah, and it's funny because there's like a whole chapter in the book about human AI teams, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that's what this conversation is pointing towards, which is that this requires rethinking, right? It's not just like you've got some basic automation that's like easy to think about. These are really sophisticated, this very sophisticated technology. It's able to take on very complex series of tasks for long and increasingly long periods of time. It's also not a human teammate, right? And when you introduce it into your work, it can create all these unintended consequences. It can disrupt human to human teamwork. It can, and so we need a new model for how we partner with AI. And that's, I think, exactly what I'm trying to articulate is what does that look like and how do you get it right? And how do you make it so that people, retain that sense of agency and motivation? That's like why they took their jobs in the first place.
Mm-hmm. So if you were to summarize, who is your intended audience and what is the message you want them to walk away with or the misconception that your book fixes? What would that be?
Yeah, I mean, my intended audience is like sort of a broad business audience, people that are in the middle of this AI transformation, or they're being asked to do more with AI and have some anxiety about it. And there's like this misconception, I think, either that's very like this very polarized conversation about AI, that it's like either, totally eclipses human capabilities or it's just full of faults. And the message is really like, you've got this, this is really not that hard, but it does require a new way of thinking about AI and about working with AI. And if you get this human AI balance right, that's how you unlock the secret. So keep the people at the center of the transformation is really the main message.
I love that. Before I let you go, I have to ask you two quick questions. One way that we try to create more AI curiosity, interest, and literacy is by asking our guests, what is a way that you like to use AI? What is a way you would not use AI?
Yes. Well, I definitely use AI to keep track of the news because it's just too much, and of developments that really matter, and to flag them to me, and to synthesize inbound requests and stuff like that, synthesize calendar things.
So when you're having it track your news, is it... Yeah. Do you have an agent set up that's tracking different headlines and
Yeah, I have one that's set up for almost empowering counter narrative stories about AI, about why human agency makes such a difference with AI. I have one that's more kind of vertical AI news and so on. So I've got that for sure. And of course we have all these hero use cases at work, right? We've got, as I described, an AI agent for accessibility, and we've got responsible AI agents that help, synthesize and do some first analysis on product use cases and so on. So lots of different AI use cases. I will say I do not use it when I email friends. I will use it for research, but I really try hard to preserve my own voice when I'm writing, because I think writing is thinking. And so it's a complicated topic, but I think there's a lot that requires people. When I think about even just complicated conversations that I might have, or let's say it's a sensitive team conversation, I might use AI to be hey, here's what's going on. What do you think? But I'm not going to have it write a script. I'm not going to have it do that for me. I'm going to feel whatever I'm feeling. I'm going to make myself feel it to be able to have that hard conversation. So yeah.
Well, thank you for those helpful guideposts on how to and how not to. I think it's really helpful for people to hear how you, someone who thinks so deeply about this, who has ethics at the core of your function and your values, to learn as to what's useful and not from your point of view. And I know we're both hopeful people. So I'll ask you the question I like to ask all of our guests before we sign off. What is the element, what is the development in AI that gives you the most hope right now?
Well, I'm going to cheat and say two things. So one of them is the accessibility stuff, like, because, when your products are not accessible, people can't actually work. And that's a very big deal. And so it's very, very exciting to me that that's getting much better, much more quickly. But I will also say, honestly, having then done the thing of written the book and sat down and kind of almost convinced myself of this, or I did convince myself of this, but I was just like, I almost wrote the book because I had to convince myself of this, is that to get AI right, it requires doubling down on human judgment and human connection. And so every domain, I think that is true. It's true in marketing. We talked about it. It's true in customer service. It's true in human AI teaming. It's true in HR. It's true in legal. And so that also gives me hope, because it's not just a theoretical argument. It's the way that you actually get the right results. And so if we can then intentionally craft this AI transformation and work in a way that extends human capability, well, that was the promise in the first place, right?
Well, thank you, Paula Goldman, for all you're doing every day to make sure we achieve that promise. And I'm so grateful to have the time to catch up with you today.
Thank you, Miriam, for all you're doing and for your leadership.
I'm Miriam Vogel with EqualAI, and this is In AI We Trust. Thank you for joining us for today's episode. Subscribe or download our podcast on Spotify, Apple Music, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts. And we welcome your feedback. If you like the podcast, please rate us, give us a review. And to learn more about EqualAI, visit us at www.equalai.org.